I'm Hal Humphreys, and this is the monthly webinar from PI Education. We're so glad you're here. Couple things real quick. My guest today and I, neither one of us that I'm aware of, are attorneys, so anything we say here is not legal advice, should not be construed as such. If you need legal advice, call your lawyer. We're going to be talking today about leadership, and I am tickled to have one of the leaders in our industry here today, Kelly Paxton. She's a certified fraud examiner and private investigator with more than 20 years investigative experience. She started her career in law enforcement in the early 90s. She was a special agent for the U.S. Customs Office of Investigations, where she worked white-collar fraud, money laundering, and narcotics cases. She earned her OSINT chops by doing more than 1,000 background investigations for the Office of Personnel Management and Department of Homeland Security. And in the private sector, she worked as an investigator for Nike, among other places. Looking into embezzlement and intellectual property and fraud cases. In the recent years, Paxton has spun her decades of broad experience into a leadership role in the investigative industry, even though she will argue tooth and nail that she's not a leader. She's made herself sought-after expert in pink-collar crime and speaks all over the country about fraud and ethics. She hosts a podcast called Great Women in Fraud to shine a light on her female colleagues. And most recently, she's become an author. Her book, Embezzlement, How to Prevent, Detect, and Investigate Pink-Collar Crime, came out in December 2020, and I'm sure she's going to tell you where you can pick that up. Kelly Paxton, thank you so much for being here. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about leadership and our roles in the investigative community, and get your thoughts on leadership. First, anything I need to add to that bio, Kelly?
No. I'm just a regular person who's really, you know what? I'm a regular person who's really curious. And I'm going to say that curiosity has created my career.
Yeah, I think that can be said for a lot of private investigators. The reason we get into this business is we're curious people. So that's very true and astute of you to notice. Let me ask you this, Kelly, how do you define leadership? What are some leadership traits and possibly leaders whose style you admire?
The biggest thing for a leader, I think, is to instill psychological safety. And, that sounds like really, really fancy stuff, but it's not. It's the not being afraid to come forward when you've failed or when you've seen someone else, and to kind of own it. And I know we're going to talk about like content that we're consuming, but right now I am on a huge Adam Grant kick. And he has his newest book, Think Again. And Dan Ariely, behavioral economics, behavioral science, why we do things and why people do things and how we can learn from that, I think is so important in a leader. Another book that I think is amazing lately is called Humor Seriously. And I thought about my most recent boss. I never saw him laugh. And I think if you have a boss who doesn't laugh or you can't laugh, well, you got a sad life, but it's dangerous, actually.
I agree 100% with that. The ability to laugh in general and at yourself specifically is a powerful tool. You were talking about the idea of admitting mistakes, showing that you are not absolutely perfect at everything. That's one of the things I do in a lot of my presentations to illustrate some of the points I'm trying to make. I will tell, here's where I screwed up, and here's how you can avoid screwing up. And there's a weird thing that happens with that. And I can't remember the study, but there was a study done, I think up in the Northeast somewhere, one of the universities up there, about this notion of admitting that you've made a mistake or have screwed something up. If you are seen as a leader, whether you like it or not, if you are someone that you stand out in front of the crowd and you talk with authority, you do those things. If people recognize you as such and you admit, hey, I've made this mistake and here's what it meant, here's what happened, let's unpack it, let's deal with it and try to avoid it in the future, your people's esteem of you actually goes up. So I think, you know, being able to admit when you've screwed up or a problem, you know, one of the books that I just recently finished, and I read it through twice, and I listened to it on a book on tape like 4 times, is the No Rules Rules book, by the founder of Netflix. And he worked with a journalist. Like, he reached out to her to actually write the book with him, and basically gave her carte blanche, said, you know, report it, tell it. When I say a thing, you come back and say, yeah, he says that, but it really means this. It's a fantastic book. Have you read it?
I have read parts of it.
Okay.
And I've heard the woman that he did it with on a podcast. You know, one of his things at Netflix is spend your money as if it's your own. They don't have this, you know, you get X per diem per day. It's
Right.
Spend the money as it's your own.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've done a lot of expense account fraud. And I think that people, if they would have had that, might not have had so many expense account frauds. It's a culture.
It's interesting you bring that up, because that's one of the things they talk about in the book, in the section on expense accounts and how to deal with expenses. They actually changed that policy from spend the money as if it's your own, because what happened is there was one of the vice presidents, like high up in the country, had in the company, had gone on a trip to Mexico, which is a couple-hour flight from Los Angeles. And he just figured, you know, I'm a country boy from wherever, and I grew up on a farm, so we spend our money frugally. He gets on the plane and he's walking past first class to get to his coach seat, and the entire marketing team is in first class with slippers on, kicked back, having a cocktail. And he talked to the CEO about that, and basically what they did was they came up with this: spend Netflix's money in the best interest of Netflix. And it's just that little bitty shift, because different people have different ideas of how they want to spend their money. I've got one friend that, like, he lives paycheck to paycheck, and he makes, you know, $30,000 a month. I don't make anywhere near that much, and I try to save some along the way. So we all spend differently. But the No Rules Rules book for me was crazy interesting because of the idea of transparency. And, you know, my business partner and I try to do our business in a transparent manner, especially with the staff and the crew here at Storyboard. But a lot of leaders, owners of companies, C-suite executives will go into a room and shut the door and have these quiet conversations about so-and-so. And then everybody in the office, like, what's going on in there? And it can lead to a lack of trust.
Oh my gosh. So I've got this example. When I was working at a company, something came out, and I said to my manager, I said, you knew about that, didn't you? And she smiled, and she took such honor in that she knew about it and no one else knew about it. And it affected us all. And it was like, it was a point of honor for her. And I was just like, no, that isn't. And I should have known at that point it was over.
Let's talk about, you know, some more traits of good leaders. You know, one of the things Kim and I did when the pandemic first hit. So this is March last year. I had literally finished up a trial up in Clarksville, Tennessee. We'd been in the courtroom all week. The attorney that I was working with got sick, didn't know why. A couple other people in the courtroom got sick, didn't know why. And then we find out there's this worldwide virus thing going on. But we shut down. We literally shut down my PI work because nobody was going to trial. Nobody wanted to go sit in a room with someone and interview them, that kind of business. We started figuring out ways to kind of deal with that with Zoom interviews and telephone interviews and that kind of business. But one of the things we started doing was hosting these happy hours, and you've been to a couple of them.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I think, yes, we take a leadership role in the PI community just because we have an education business and we provide continuing education. We kind of have to. But hosting the happy hour, we started once a week, and then it really became too much just to kind of organize and do that thing. So we went to once a month, and now we're doing it once whenever we feel like it. But by doing that, it was bizarre how this group of disparate investigators from around the country that do, police dog handling expert work to, criminal investigations to civil investigations to due diligence work to everything. And then, our friend Paul down in New Zealand, who's always got a story to tell, but it formed this little community. And I think, I'm not saying that I'm a particularly good leader, but I think one of the things that good leaders do is create opportunities for people to build a community, and not just we're an industry of whatever. It's like we're a community. We work together. We help each other out.
Well, that actually, so I was out on a run this morning, and the whole COVID thing, I actually think for me in my business, it is a net positive. And it's a net positive for a lot of things. But, 2019, I traveled a ton. In 2020, I was going to have my best year ever. And then, COVID happened. But during that time, I was able to do my book. But more importantly, I did Great Women in Fraud as a podcast. And I wanted to do a podcast a couple of years ago, but my virtual assistant said, Kelly, you need to make money. Like, come on. And because she wanted to be paid. But it gave me time because I was getting so many people reaching out to me, primarily on LinkedIn, saying, hey, I want to do what you do. Can we have a call? And I'll take calls all day long, but it was getting to be too much. And I felt like a bit of groundhog. And so I did the Great Women in Fraud based on me being on the Great Women in Compliance. And that community is, I spoke at an event the other night, and a professor wrote to me and she says, one of my students loves Great Women in Fraud. She's like an accounting student. And so making these communities is so incredibly important.
I've got so a lot of people in the community know this. I don't think a lot of people in the industry know this, but I've got a bifurcated career. I have been a certified general real estate appraiser for the past 30 years, plus or minus 28 years exactly, but I grew up in the business. I'm also a licensed private investigator and certified fraud examiner. The skill set is the same. And the CFE designation with the certified general real estate appraiser, that makes me a natural expert on valuation issues for court cases. But I started doing real estate appraisals again about 6 months ago. And, you take a 10, 12-year break from an industry and you come back into it. And well, two things happen. Number one, I was like, well, I'll turn on this spigot and pick up some extra money while we're not going to court. I turned it on and it ended up being a fire hose. Like it hit me really hard. The other thing is I realized the tech has advanced so much in this industry that I'm going to have some help figuring out how to do this business. So I hired a young friend of mine. She's actually the daughter of one of my appraisal management company clients, and her name is Sierra. And Sierra she's a young lady. She's a trainee as a real estate appraiser. But what she did is she just naturally said, there are so many young trainees out here, and it's hard for them to find a mentor. It's hard for them to get work. It's hard for them to get a foot in the door. And a lot of them are young females. So she said, why don't I start this Clubhouse chat group? Are you familiar with Clubhouse?
I haven't been in it yet. I've got to get in it. Yeah.
It's pretty entertaining. But she started this Clubhouse group of trainees who want to get into the real estate appraisal profession. And just by starting the group and and of course, she grew up in the business. Her dad's an appraiser. Her mom's an appraiser. She knows a lot more than most trainees know. But she's taken a leadership role. And now she's been appointed one of the members of the National Association of Appraisers trainee committee to invite people. And anybody can step up and take a leadership role at any level.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't consider myself a leader. I've never technically managed people like on a long-term basis, but I've done search warrants and managed cases and things like that. But I mean, people come to you for something. Yeah. And I guess it's leadership or mentor. I would say in my case, it's more mentorship.
Right.
But we're also at the point in our careers where we can afford to do it.
Right.
Like time-wise.
Right.
So.
Right. I just think the notion of people saying, I'm not a leader, I just want to sit down, hunker down and do the work. That's great. And I've done that in my career. I've done that throughout my career and at various times, but everybody out there has something to offer. And those offerings are ways to step into a leadership role. The other book that I've been reading, and I'm not quite done with it yet, but are you familiar with Dan Heath?
Dan Heath?
Dan
No.
Heath?
Mm-mm.
He's got a book called Upstream.
Dan. Oh, yeah. Heath. Sorry. Yeah. Upstream. Oh, yeah. I read it a while ago.
Right. So I just picked it up. I was at a conference and a friend mentioned it to me. So I picked it up and I've been listening to it on tape while I'm out working. And oh my God. I mean, we get so busy in this day to day. Oh, I've got to put out this fire. I've got to put out this fire. I've got to put out this fire, that we don't pay attention to what's happening upstream that makes these fires happen. And, Dan Heath has worked himself into a leadership role in the business book world by providing really good content like that.
Oh yeah. His stuff is awesome. I'm looking on my thing. I think I even have it, but, no, his stuff is really good. If you're just, catching the fish down below or whatever, what's happening above to cause whatever it is. And yeah, I mean, as far as another book that I have two books that I got to show this one. Sending the Elevator Back Down. And this is how Great Women in Fraud started, was from Lisa Fine and Mary Shirley of Great Women in Compliance. And I have a little blurb in there. Helping each other, creating this community. But then it's so funny, at the beginning of the show, you said we're not attorneys. And you and I have talked about this. Attorneys, oh my God, they're the bane of my existence sometimes. But when you need one, and you need a good one. Have you read Intentional Integrity by Rob Chestnut?
I have not.
Okay, so you got to get this book. How Smart Companies Can Lead an Ethical Revolution. What I love about it is that he calls them code moments. So he gives these examples, and then he gives sort of, what would you do? And he gives you 3 choices. You don't have these weird, like, well, if someone came to you and offered you a bribe, he sets the story up so much better. So that's one that, and again, he's an attorney, and I don't like it when attorneys dabble in the investigator world, because we don't dabble in the attorney world.
Right.
But I think this is one of my favorite books right now. And it's just being intentional about integrity. Imagine that.
Yeah. Who would have thought? And for those of you listening, the notion of upstream, the way he starts the book is, there are these 2 guys sitting by a river bank, and they're having a chat, and this kid comes floating down the river screaming, drowning. So they jump into the river and pull the kid out. And as they're getting that kid to the bank, there's another kid coming down, screaming and crying, drowning. So they go save that one. And it happens over and over. And finally, the one guy just gets out of the stream and starts walking away. And his buddy's like, where are you going? We got to save these children. He goes, I'm going to stop the guy who's throwing these kids in the river. And for leadership thinking, it's easy to address the fires. It's easy to say, I've got this emergency to deal with. And the funny thing is, when you put out a fire, when you deal with an emergency, sometimes you're the hero, and that feels great. But leadership isn't about being a hero. It's about walking upstream and finding out, why is this happening? So I'm keeping a list of the books that we've got here, and we'll review those at the, I guess, halfway mark of the webinar today. Moving on, what are some traits that you think don't make for good leadership?
This is my phrase, and I can't remember who to give credit for. Toxic charisma. I think it's Scott Galloway from Pivot. And I was messaging a friend the other night, and we were talking about a bad leader that we're both, aware of. And she goes, oh my God, that is so spot on. It's that toxic charisma. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say that toxic charisma kind of only floats up. And so if you're below it, you get the brunt of it. Right. But if you're above it, you just see this charisma. You don't see the toxicity of it.
Right. And if you're below
So
it
that's,
if you're below it and you see it, there's this hesitancy to point it out because it's seen as sour grapes. It's seen as, whatever, but it's kind of the emperor's new clothes thing. It's like, can y'all not see that dude's naked?
yeah, yeah. Just, and, bullying and retaliation. And I was talking with my kids the other day and they're like, bullying? You guys are adults. And
Right.
my kids who are in their early 20s, they kind of thought that as you progress in your career, you can't get bullied.
Huh.
And I was just like, oh, you have no, and they're like, but you're successful and you've attained this. And how does one get bullied at that point? And I'm just like, oh man, getting put on the island where,
Right.
Cases are taken away or you're not getting shared with the information or they're not asking for your feedback. Um, Being put on the island is, if it's ever happened to someone out there, it's really horrific. And actually, I've had this woman on my podcast, Jackie Garrix, and she was a whistleblower. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and she whistleblew at the Veterans Affairs. And she's done this great paper on people that are, retaliated against. They have PTSD. They literally have the same symptoms. And, young people don't think it can happen to someone who's mid-career or even towards the end of their career. And it was an interesting discussion.
Yeah. So, and I have found that the people that do the bullying are woefully insecure human beings. And that's the reason they're being bullies. I'm thinking specifically of two instances. One was I was working on a team of investigators at one point on a criminal case, and one of the investigators was just a terribly insecure man, and he did everything he could to bully, push around, undermine everybody else on the team. And and he was the leader of the group, but it's like, dude, you're not helping. You're making things more difficult. Um, and then the other one that comes to mind is, when we think of leadership, when we think of people in leadership positions, a judge, we assume a judge is, well read, well educated, has gotten to that position because they're grounded and balanced in the way they think, blah, blah, blah. But I'm telling you, I got called to task by a judge one time because I left the courtroom when one of the jurors was released. And I asked the juror when they walked out of the door, I said, may I ask you a couple of questions? Sure. I asked a couple of questions. She started to cry. I said, I'm so sorry to bother you. I know it's been a really emotional time. Just going about your day, kind of thing. Well, word got back to the judge that I had accosted her and made her cry. So he calls me up in front of the court, private investigator, and gave me a dressing down like you would give a 10-year-old. And I said, I stood there and took it like, a good person who's being bullied. And I said, Your Honor, I have the entire conversation on tape if you'd like to hear it. And at that point, he says, I don't need to hear it. We're done here. Like it was a total bullying moment. I'm like, how are you so insecure if you're in this seat of power? But leaders don't do that. Actual leaders try to bring people along and do so with context and trust and those kind of things. So I think you're right. The bullying and all right, tell me the phrase again for overconfidence.
Toxic charisma.
Toxic charisma. Great phrase. I love that. Can you share a funny story about a bad boss along the way that you've dealt with?
Yeah, so I have one, and I was doing an interview with a young professional, and it turns out he had a text that proved that he didn't do what he was accused of doing. And so we were kind of laughing, and I was using my boss's office. And when we came out, the kid left, and my boss was like, what was that about? And I'm like, didn't do it. And, we were kind of laughing about it. And, he's probably gonna be a good source for me. And my boss looks at me and he says, I don't ever want to hear laughter in my office. They should be crying. I take joy in them crying. And, I'm no longer there. He's no longer there. But that, again, same boss who I never saw laugh, never once saw laugh. And empathy is so incredibly important. And that's where I think I'm a good investigator, because I'm empathetic.
Right.
And I can use it for good or for evil. I use it for good. But yeah, bad boss, just, you should make him cry. It's like, what good does it make to make a person cry? What,
It does no good. And here's the thing. As investigators, I mean, I know a lot of private investigators are solo operators. They're out there running their business by themselves, doing other things. So you're not actually leading a team. But for those that do lead teams, the successful ones, I'm thinking specifically of Kelly Riddle here. He's an investigator in Texas. He's got a team of investigators that work for him, and he leads with context. He leads with trust. And here's the thing: when you assume someone's going to screw up and treat them as such, they will, in fact, meet your expectations. But if you assume that they're competent and trust them to do good work, they're more likely to meet those expectations, right? So making people cry just doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the business, doesn't help you. So yeah, that's just crazy. Let's see. So Kim Green, our editor at Pursuit Magazine, has made my life as easy as possible with putting together a kind of an outline and a script. And considering the way we're all so crazy busy, it's useful for me to come in and look at the script, but I have to look at it sometimes really closely. All right, how have these leadership styles played out during COVID? So I think for me, when you think about the different kinds of leadership, the COVID situation has allowed more people to work remotely in Zoom conferences and that kind of stuff. And the more distance you have physically from bullies, the easier it is to deal with them a lot of times. If they're in proximity, it can be a real ass pain. But if you got some distance, it's easier to finish a Zoom meeting and walk away from it than it is to walk 2 doors down in an office and sit there and fume about what they've done. So I think one of the good things about COVID for us has been that ability to work remotely and not have to congregate in an office and still get stuff done. It kind of makes the real leaders rise to the top.
So I was listening to a webinar yesterday with my friend Trent Russell, who's like a data guy and does audits and things like that, culture audits. And he was talking to 2 people, different companies, I believe. And he said they were told they were going back to the office in a given time. And they cried to him because of that same stuff. They're more effective at home. They're more efficient at home. But then also the other parts of it, you have introverts that are really, really good at their job, and going in and having to do that sort of, I'm going to call it like it is, ass kissing is not easy for them.
Right.
And they've been more efficient. So why make them do it? But he literally said he had 2 people that were crying about going back into the office.
I get it. I totally get it. I've talked to so many people over the past 6 months who have dreaded the thought of going back to an office. And they, like you said, they get more done. They're more productive. They actually create more value when they're working on things in focused short bursts, as opposed to, and this is another trait of leadership, I think, good leaders don't measure the wrong thing, right? A lot of mediocre leaders measure hours sitting at a desk, which is the wrong way to get productivity out of people. The people that work for me, I do not care how many hours they spend on a task. If I give them and I don't pay them by the hour. I actually have one that I pay by the hour because that's the only way we could figure out to make it make sense for her and me. But I don't care how much time she spends on a project. If it's 10 hours to get it done right, that's fine. If she can get that project done in 30 minutes and take the rest of the day and go play with her kid, I'm fine with that. I don't care. I need the project done. I need the thing done. I don't need hours in a seat just to be in a seat for hours. So that's another thing that I think is really improved with the COVID situation. Moving on to the next point that Kim has outlined for us. Have you benefited from acts of kindness or generosity from your PI colleagues this year? And I'm going to throw two things out there from the field. We've got Catherine Scott says, "Hi, Kelly. So appreciate your help when Nick and I called you months ago." I'm sure you know who that is. And then Natalie says, "Kelly, I loved meeting you at the Zoom happy hour. I only knew men investigators before the happy hour. You were the first woman investigator I met, and you were so kind to me." Those are little acts of kindness that we started doing during the COVID thing. Have you experienced or benefited from acts of kindness from fellow PIs?
Oh my God. Okay. Well, my whole podcast is that. I mean, and it's not just for women listeners, and I have male guests on it, but ironically, the male guests don't get as many downloads as the female guests. And I don't know why yet. It's, we're 29 episodes in, but yeah, people giving their time for that, people doing, so much acts of kindness. And I hope that I've helped you with this. I know I've helped Kim with it a little bit, but I love LinkedIn. Right. I love LinkedIn. I connect people. That's what I do. And my name got thrown out by it's a woman that I just admire. And she mentioned to an attorney in London, we had a call and I was like, oh, she should talk to this person. It is all connected.
Right.
And Kevin Bacon's 6 degrees? No, it's 2 at most. It is 2. So people reach out to me all the time. I reach out to people. The whole reason I became a special agent was me picking up the phone. And I mentor people all the time. And I said, if you are curious, and you have to be curious in this business, you pick up the phone, you send a LinkedIn message. You know what? If they don't respond to you, and I know I have one person that I lost in my LinkedIn, and whoever, if you're out there, hit me up again. Give them 2 tries. You never know what's going on with someone's life. So just do it. People want to help. And going back to COVID and being efficient, they said people are working more hours than the regular 40-hour work week, but we're working weird shifts. Like I basically don't work until 10 in the morning because I run and I do sort of, personal and house stuff. But then I work hard from 10 to 4. And then I take a break. And then, at night before I go to bed, I do more work.
Right.
So it's those, and so the community is amazing. And also time zones. Yeah. It just makes life easier. So I can talk to that person in London.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Speaking of talking about acts of kindness and how we benefit from our colleagues in this community, there's hardly a week that goes by that I don't talk to Brian Willingham on the phone. Sometimes I call him, say, hey, I need this, or can you help me with this? Sometimes he calls me and says, hey, I want to run this by you. But that's kind of how this community thing works. And I'll admit, I am probably the absolute least adept human being at LinkedIn, just because I don't ever go on there. I'll get my email. It says so-and-so wants to connect on LinkedIn. I'm like, okay. And I just forget about it. But I'm kind of that with social media in general. I know a lot of, and I'm an old man. I mean, let's just be honest, social media for me it's a chore. But LinkedIn, I think a lot of people to get a lot out of it actually put some time into working that system and making those connections. And it's just another tool to make connections. And I think, the word that came up when we were talking about you, Kellen, was Maven. It's what you do. You're a Maven. You put people in touch. You connect people. That's what it's all about. So we have gone past the halfway mark, and I have been urged to point out that this is the monthly webinar from PI Education. We're so glad you're here. We are offering 15% off of all of our courses through April 30th. The coupon code is SPRING21, SPRING21. And that's any course on PI Education you want to take. Just go through the process, select your course, go to the checkout. When it asks for a coupon code, key in SPRING21, SPRING21, and you'll get 15% off. Coming back to to Kelly Paxton, our guest today. And if you're just joining us, I'm sure you're not. Everybody's been kind of riveted to the screen so far. Kelly is a certified fraud examiner. When did we met years ago at the CFE conference?
Yeah. I've been a CFE since I'm looking at my May 2008. So we're coming up on 13 years, and we've talked numerous times. You and Kim in the pursuit, you're way ahead of the curve. And Kim tweet this last week about someone who wanted the printed course catalog. You guys have been online, and I mean, really, you have been so ahead of the curve. And sometimes you're so far ahead of the curve that you're actually behind it. No, but you've stuck with it. And that's the thing, is like, you guys have stuck with it, and it's that staying power.
Well, here's the thing. I really despise when it was, oh, my passion is blah, blah, blah. I don't know why that phrase annoys me, but it does. But I love the PI education business. I got an email through my website yesterday from a public defender investigator in, I don't remember where, somewhere in not Pacific Northwest, but northern western United States, asking what my fee was to speak to a group of public defender investigators. I'm like, yeah, that's free. I'll do that all day long. And I don't know. I love the education bit. I love the pursuit business, and we just like it. We have a good time with it, and we've made so many good friends across the country that it has worked out really well for us. I have a couple things we need to read from the crowd. Picard Management Tip tweeted, "When you make a mistake, apologize right away. Embrace humility over defense." And I cannot stress this enough, especially if you're a private investigator. If you screw up, if you miss a detail, if you do something wrong, the absolute worst thing you can do is try and cover that up. If you tell your attorney immediately when you realize, oh my God, I didn't check that guy's criminal background, or whatever it is you forgot to do, they can deal with it. But they get up and start asking questions and cross-examination or going after somebody, and then they find out you didn't do it, then they're kind of screwed. So everybody makes mistakes. Anybody who says they don't is lying. And the difference is, how do you deal with it? Going back to the books we were talking about earlier, the Netflix no rules business, the CEO of Netflix made a decision to, when they were starting to work on the streaming service, they also had the DVD service, and you paid one fee, I think it was $10, and you got streaming and DVDs. And he was thinking, well, we're going to phase out the DVDs anyway, so let's split those products and charge $8 for streaming and $8 for DVDs. And their stock plummeted like immediately. They lost half of their user base in a matter of a week. And what did he do? Did he try to blame it on anybody else? Did he try to cover it up? He goes on YouTube and apologizes and said, I messed up, and here's how I messed up, and here's how we're going to fix it. It was such a public acceptance of a mistake that Saturday Night Live made fun of him. It was probably the low point of his career, but by standing up and saying, I screwed up, let's fix it, you can avoid a lot of problems down the way. Let's
Dan
see.
Ariely, who's, everyone who knows me knows I love Dan Ariely, behavioral economist. He did an analysis, and I don't have it in front of me, but one of the things for companies that were going to perform well, and the biggest indicator was if they could make a mistake and come forward with it and be safe. And it turned out to be the biggest indicator. And I'm a little conflicted not with that, but I get a lot of people who ask me, if you catch someone who, quote, made a mistake, using the company credit card at Costco for, whatever beer, is it the broken windows? Is it you cut them off? Now, if it is that, they're going to be too scared to come and say, hey, and they're just going to hope it goes through. So I'm a little conflicted on that. But I think as long as you do it consistently across, up and down the org chart, fine. But if you're not going to be consistent up and down the org chart, then it's not going to work.
Yeah, no doubt. I think this is coming from Patricia. She says, joining your state private investigator association is a great way to offer and receive acts of kindness. I'm a newbie, and the Private Investigators Association of Idaho has been really great. I will say, Patricia, I agree with you 100%. In most cases, there are some states where the PI organizations there's not just one association. In Tennessee has 4 PI associations that all claim to be statewide associations. One of them is situated in Memphis. One is located in Nashville. One is located in Knoxville. The other is in Chattanooga. So they're just at disparate ends of the state, and they claim to be statewide organizations, and they spend so much time infighting that they don't actually help new people get into the business. Illinois has a great PI association. Indiana has a great PI association. Florida has 2 PI associations, but they do a good job. They're all supportive of the PI community in general. South Carolina, again, great group of people down there. North Carolina has a great group of people. Idaho, I have not dealt with, but according to Patricia, it's a great organization. Here's the thing. If you're not a member of your state organization, check it out. It won't take you long as a living, breathing, fully formed adult human being to figure out whether or not they're going to be helpful. But if they are, join it. Join in and share those acts of kindness and receive those acts of kindness. And those opportunities are out there all over the place. I tend to prattle on sometimes, so we don't get to the end of the script. So this past year, Barry McGuire, Mike Spencer, Scott Fulmer, you have all started podcasts this year or with the past couple of years. Talk to us about other people using their voices in public to raise us all up. How does, number one, if you host a podcast, you're stepping up and saying, all right, I'm taking some kind of a leadership role. To stand up and say, I'm going to host a podcast is admitting I'm going to take a leadership role. But is that a good idea? Has it worked for you?
I think it's really working for me. Again, I'm not tracking it monetarily or anything at this point. Some people really like it. Some people like to be guests. And I would say if you are interested in it, ask to be a guest. I listen to podcasts all day long. I'm like a crazy person, but like Marcy Phelps, she has a great blog and she posts regularly on, LinkedIn. Brian Willingham, he's a guest on a lot. We just did a guest appearance with White Collar Crime. So there are a lot of places. It's not just the podcast. Again, that's why I really like LinkedIn, is because you're seeing people putting content out there. Also, you know what? I love Twitter. I'm a crazy Twitter person. I love it personally and professionally. And it's getting sources. I've gotten so many great sources.
Sure. And there are several models of podcast. The first version of the Sound of Pursuit podcast I think it was kind of brilliant. Kim spearheaded it, and it was hyper produced, good quality interviews with we actually hired musician friends to create theme music for us and the whole thing. And it was a good bit of podcast, business. It takes a lot of work to do that. It's basically a full-time job. The other idea of a podcast is to start a podcast where you, the host, just tell a story. You just tell a story. I'm thinking specifically of Roman Mars with 99% Invisible. He just goes on and tells a story. And it's a design blog or a design podcast. So he talks about design and he tells a story about design and what works and what doesn't. But it's literally, he does the research and he tells a story.
Do you listen to Swindled?
No.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, I will give a caveat. There are certain episodes I like better than others. It's the only one on Patreon for. It's by a concerned citizen. And his one just about E. coli in upstate New York in Canada, horrifying. He does such good work. And actually, he just tweeted, there's like, I think he said 20 business schools that are requiring it for part of their curriculum. Because, and he made a joke about it, like, where's my royalties from this? Because he has no sponsors or anything. He, like, the research that goes into his is amazing. So I would highly recommend Swindled.
Okay, yeah. And here's the thing, podcasts are entertaining kind of across the board. But if you're a private investigator and you've been in this business more than a year, you've got crazy stories that people want to hear. You're going to have to change names and locations and sexes and that kind of thing. But I mean, share your stories, start a podcast. If you want to step out and assume a leadership role, that's a great way to do it. The other method of doing a podcast that seems to work really well is host a podcast where you have a guest on and you talk about a topic. That's basically what we do here with the webinar for PI Education and Pursuit Magazine. We host experts and interesting people who can help us talk about topics or ideas and that kind of business. That's always a good way to do a podcast. But you know, for those of you out there in the business, hosting a podcast is not a terribly difficult thing to do. The tech is pretty easy to deal with. You can do it with a Yeti microphone that you plug into the USB port. Like it's totally easy to do. And it's a way to kind of build that brand and take a leadership role. Let's move on and move on to social media. And how do you use LinkedIn, Twitter, et cetera, to play a leadership role, whether or not you want to call it that?
So actually for the ACFE Global this year, I am doing a presentation called Your Brand as a CFE.
Okay.
And I did a little survey on LinkedIn, and a lot of people think that you don't need a brand. And I will tell you, you need a brand. Because as investigators, and whether you're in-house or, you know, independent, eventually, as I say, you're going to put your foot in it. And things are going to happen quickly. And all of a sudden, if you are only known as an investigator who works for a company and not for your integrity or whatever specialty it is, when you get kicked to the curb or you decide to walk, and some people will decide to walk because they're like, I can't bear this anymore.
Right. You're
going to have to start from scratch.
Right.
And you're going to be most likely mid to late career.
Yeah.
And so I worked at Nike. Everything's about your brand. And I hate the term. I really don't like it from that experience, but it is true. And I've done it on LinkedIn. I have over 11,000 connections. I work it. And it's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. It has to be a two-way street. I never sell on LinkedIn. There's tons of people who sell on LinkedIn. But I love Twitter because Twitter, when something happens, there's this amazing different communities. There's a PI community. There's open source community, you know, Justin Sites that I met through Michael Bazell, through Cynthia Hetherington, it's like the Russian nesting dolls.
Right.
You have all these little communities and you can keep up with things via social media. Sure. Where it doesn't take much. And, you know, I used to work on the phones all the time. Oh my God, I hate phone calls. I mean, I like phone calls where I'm coaching people, but like, no, you can get so much off of this little box here.
Right. Twitter, I find to be entertaining. I find it to be a useful way to interact with PIs from around the world. And I also find it a way to just explore my smart ass nature. I also find Twitter to be a little bit of a time suck sometimes.
Reddit is the time suck for me.
Yeah.
3 hours later, where was I?
Yeah, you'll come up for air and be like, wait a minute. What time is it? Yeah.
That's Reddit for me.
Yeah. So do you have any specific tips on LinkedIn that people can do? Like one takeaway that someone could say, oh, LinkedIn, I can use it for that. Anything advice you give on LinkedIn?
I'm going to say be consistent. And if it's being consistent by just doing once a week, and I'm not going to name names because I love these people. There are people that put stuff on LinkedIn that is just like a big billboard. You need to be helpful. Right. Be helpful. Don't say, I'm going to wherever, like, that's it. Like, okay, so you get to go somewhere. I went somewhere and I learned this, or, someone pointed this out. So use it not as a billboard, but be consistent. Don't just, go in once every 3 months. Like, I just got back from vacation, fully vaccinated, still took precautions. I think I posted once or twice last week. I'm behind on my podcast, so it's going to be a little bit late this week, but that being consistent is really important.
Right. I've, those two things in particular, being consistent, showing up to the page, showing up to the microphone, whatever, on a schedule. And it doesn't have to be every day. I know a lot of people get really excited, like, I'm going to blog, I've done this. I'm going to blog every day. And, after about 5 days, you're like, geez, Louise, I don't have anything to say or whatever. Pick a schedule that's kind of easy to do to start with. Get your feet wet, figure out how to do it, that kind of thing, but be consistent and commit to it for a certain amount of time. The other thing, I'm thinking of a specific person who Twitter feed posts these like card memes, like, stand up and be proud of yourself, or, do a thing today. It's like just nonstop memes, but it's obviously coming through Hootsuite or some other service, and it's scheduled 6 months ahead. And it's just like this thing. And everyone has a sales pitch, buy my thing, sign up for my. If you host a podcast, if you do a blog post, if you are on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, share something useful, give stuff away. That's Brian Willingham. People are like, how can I be like Brian Willingham? I'm like, you can't. But if you want to try, give away advice for free for about 6 years. That's how you be like Brian. How do I be like Kelly Paxton? Well, you give stuff away that is useful. And you get paid back in spades when you do that.
Okay, so do we have a chat going right now? Is there like a feed or something? Because I'm going to give something away. Whoever puts in the chat right now, I will give you a book. Okay? So you got a Kim, or you have to tell me who it is, and I'll just send it to him. Okay?
All right, so whoever's listening out of the folks in the room, and I see you're in there, if you're paying attention and you say, I want a book, the first person to post, I want a book. And Kim will text me your name. I will make sure that Kelly gets a book to you. Yeah, that's just it. Give stuff away. So speaking of book, tell us about your book.
Oh my God. It's like, it was a project that took forever. And then in COVID, I'm like, okay, I'm in. I got to do it. I have, this is like, my family would not say I'm funny. They would never say I'm funny. But the people who have left reviews on Amazon or just, posted about it is like, she's really kind of funny. And it's not me being funny. It's the stories that are crazy that people kept telling me, you have got to write this down because no one will believe it. So it's really, and my daughter calls it a pamphlet. And I said, no, it's not a pamphlet. It's over 100 pages. It's like 137 or something. And it's just stories. It's a quick afternoon read. And it's like, oh my God. I primarily teach and train investigators, auditors, accountants about embezzlement. But I really want business owners to read about it, because the business owners are the ones that are getting ripped off. Like, hopefully and I'm not going to say are smart enough to not get ripped off, because I've seen people like us get ripped off. But I want the business community to do the book. Okay. No. Don't worry about that. I want the business community, because, the other thing is like, there is so much shame when you are a victim. And I want that victim shaming to end. And I think the book will help it end, because they're going to see, oh my God, an astronaut got ripped off. They're pretty smart. How did that happen? And oh my God, a brain surgeon got ripped off, or, whatever. I want people to talk about embezzlement. Like, if you got your car ripped off, would you be embarrassed to say, I got my car ripped off? No. But when you get embezzled by that nice, sweet little lady or nice dude in the office, you don't want to talk about it because you think you're stupid. No, you're not. You're too busy making the big decisions.
And you're a human being. You're
Yeah.
a trusting human being, and there's nothing at all. I talked to private investigators who are always like, I don't trust anybody. I've said this myself. Like, I just don't trust people. But at the end of the day, I mean, Malcolm Gladwell, I think it has talked about the default to trust as being kind of what makes us capable of interacting as human beings.
Yeah.
Fraudsters prey on our default to trust. And it doesn't mean we're weak. It doesn't mean we're stupid. It doesn't mean we're bad human beings. It means we're actually good human beings, and we got suckered.
Okay, this is not planned, you guys. I am reading this book, Confident Women. This is about women grifters.
Okay.
So, but I have to tell you, this is how she gets us, of course. This is what makes us vulnerable. If we wanted to kill the confidence woman, we'd simply have to stop having confidence in anything and anybody. We'd have to lock our doors and slam our windows shut and peer apprehensively at each other from slits in the blinds. But is that worth it? And it's like, we can't live that way. We can't. So, I mean, I just joke that I trust no one. I can't get out of bed if I'm going to trust no one.
Right.
But trust but verify, like my sticker from Brian Williams that it's on the back of my computer. So, yeah.
I've got mine over here on the wall, trust but verify. And, going back to Brian Willingham, I gave him a shout out in the Monday briefing from PI Education Pursuit Magazine, because, when you're presenting on branding your brand as a CFE, and you could change that presentation and say your brand as a private investigator. But one of the things that you and I kind of knocked about, and Brian and I talked about earlier this week, is there is an ego-driven thing that people say, I want to call it Thomas H. Humphreys Investigative Services, or, Humphreys and Associates. And my first name for my PI business was Humphreys and Associates. But I realized that was ego-driven, number one. Number two, if I ever wanted to sell the business in any form or fashion, that really limits that possibility. And number three, by separating myself from the brand, I can bring in other people. And it's not just like, how can you come do this? It's like, Find Investigations. Can you come help us out? And I can send someone, it opens up a lot of possibilities. But the other thing it does is, and this is, for those of you private investigators, I know we all love swag, and Brian is a genius at swag. So Monday, I got home, and in the mail had come a couple of Diligentia Group hats. The Trust But Verify flag, the stickers and all that business. We've sent out Find Investigations hats in the past. We're working on some Pursuit swag that we're hopefully going to get wrapped up in the next little bit and be sharing, some fun swag from Pursuit Magazine. But branding is crazy important. And for those investigators who say, well, I can't be on social media, I can't do blah, 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 because I'm a private investigator and everything's top secret. It's not. It's just not. Especially if you're working a trial, be it civil or criminal, man, there ain't nothing secret about that. It's public record. It's going to come out. I know there are parts of it that you don't want to share with the other side along the way, but I mean, we're not doing anything top secret by and large.
I'm going to give a plug for Brian's t-shirt. So I just got back from Mexico, wore it there. I'm sure they were like, what does that mean? But it's really good quality. It's not a crappy t-shirt. It's actually a high, like, I'm proud to wear it, and it's comfortable. So plug for Brian's t-shirt.
Yeah, no doubt. So we are bumping right up against the end of our hour together. Kelly, thank you for being here. To take us out, let's talk about going forward into normal times, we hope. Kim and I got our second shot Thursday before last. I'm pretty excited about letting that fully bake so we can go spend time with family and friends without worrying so much about the COVID virus. But going forward, what are some things you could advise people to show leadership, and tangible things like, you know, in the appraisal and the PI industry, both two that I'm intimately familiar with. I see people show up to conferences and meetings and they've got on like sweatpants and a t-shirt and whatever. I mean, you know, anything from dress to correspondence to writing, speaking, you know, what are some things you can tell people that will help them assume a role as a leader and have credibility?
You know, our brains work in like less than 6 seconds. And so, yeah, if you show up in the sweats and, you know, the Magnum PI, whatever, people are going to remember that, you know, they are definitely going to remember it. And it's easy to have a uniform. Just step that uniform up so you don't have to think about it like Steve Jobs or something like that. I have private stationery that I have a great saying on the back from The Big Short. It's one of my favorite sayings ever. Just do something to like remember you. I send my books out. So I send my book out, I sign it in pink ink. And then I have a white envelope with pink ink address. And I'm the pink lady. Like people call me pink. And I've tried to get away from it because remember, hashtag, it's position, not gender. It's not women committing any type of crime. But right. I'm the pink lady. So when I go on stage in person again now, I wear pink because people remember, oh, that crazy pink lady. So pick something out that, you know, are you wearing a pink tie for me today? It looks pinkish.
It's a peach.
Oh, okay. Peach pink, you know.
Yeah.
Have a uniform. It just makes it easier. And like, be consistent. You know what? It's all about consistency. Consistently showing up. Be consistent.
Yep, absolutely. And in your branding, as well as in your speaking and your blog and everything, like it all ties together. Now, real quick, we're out of time. Let's see. C. Hamilton says, we're working on our branding and hiring a professional to help design our logo and aid in website design. I believe it'll be money well spent. You couldn't be more right. C. Hamilton, it's a great thing to hire someone that knows what they're doing in these areas. I'm just going to go ahead and plug Ruben Roel.
Yeah.
What's his website? What's it called? PI?
Oh God.
PI marketing?
Maybe.
Let's see.
He's on LinkedIn and he's on Twitter.
Ruben does all the design work and website stuff for PI Education Pursuit. PI marketing. PI marketing home.
Yeah, you got to be consistent. You know, I was watching a webinar yesterday from an attorney who's really good. Oh my God, no LinkedIn, or it was like such a bare minimum LinkedIn, and their website sucked. Now I know they've gotten multi-million-dollar settlements nonstop. If there's any attorneys out there, stop that. Like, I know you think you don't need it, but this young generation coming up that will hire you will dismiss you. Yeah. I don't care if you're Jerry Spence anymore. You have to be out there. So, yes. You know, sorry, my soapbox.
Yes, no doubt. So, Kelly, do you mind to say the winners? Did you get those names I texted to you?
Oh God. Okay. The winners. Who are the winners? Let's see. Patricia Bruder. Yes. Jessica Petrino and Catherine Scott. Catherine, didn't I already send you one? Patricia and Jessica, send me a LinkedIn message or an email, kelly@kellypaxton.com, and I will put those in the mail and they will be signed in pink ink.
Kelly, thank you so much for being with us today. I always enjoy spending time with you. We need to do more of it. And I'm going to go ahead, Kim's going to hate me for this. I'm going to go ahead and commit to next Thursday, if we're in town and able, we're going to host another PI cocktail hour. And we do it in a Zoom setting like this. So if you're in the room watching the webinar, number one, thank you for being here. Number two, join us next Thursday for cocktail hour. We'll send out a message about that next week. Kelly, thank you again. I hope you have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you. This has been awesome. And I just love you guys.